we've been having meetings with government officials, with quite a lot of civil society activists, human rights defenders. I came here in September on an official visit as well. When we met with the Justice Ministry, the Foreign Ministry, the Interior Affairs, and the Ombudsman, of course, and the National Center for Human Rights. Now we're in the early stages of engagement with the Uzbek government. And we're trying to see what use we could be to them in their reforming efforts. And we're here to help in whatever way we can. And we have our recommendations, some of which have been followed. And we hope to see more of that, especially in terms of facilitating an operational freedom for civil society and the press, especially a free and independent press, which is one thing in Uzbekistan, and which we believe it would be crucial for reform efforts to be fructious.
This is a very dynamic time in Uzbekistan. It's a moment of hope, and engagement takes many forms. I think, as Marius said, part of it, in terms of the government, is in a way reintroducing the role of a human rights organization to authorities. This is a country that for many years has not really seen international human rights organizations or journalists operating on the ground. And so one thing we're trying to establish is demonstrating what we do, which is supporting civil society, reporting on human rights issues and abuses, making timely recommendations. So in our meetings with authorities, we're trying to show that the role of a human rights organization is not just to come in and say, you did this wrong, but it's to talk about international obligations, domestic obligations, law, but also things that are outside the law, just as support for civil society, bringing our work and examples from the US or Kazakhstan or wherever it is, working on women's rights, the reform of the criminal justice system. So there's a lot of things that go into it. But I think, civil society and government have different roles. So ultimately, it's not that we're going to come together and sort of merge with, government or any other institutions. Human Rights Watch wants to establish itself here as an independent, critical voice that will, always be there to support both civil society and the government.
Mm-hmm. So, to support means what? What kind of assistance are the Uzbeks asking, for example, from your organization? What are they expecting, do you think?
Well, I think high-level officials often want to know how is international opinion on Uzbekistan and specifically on its human rights record, which has been so historically damaged and bad for many, many good reasons. They, of course, I think often from a pragmatic perspective want to know how can they change the image of Uzbekistan. And our response, and my response often is that, we're not working on Uzbekistan's image. We're working on issues of human rights and inculcating a culture and the values of human rights, whether it's the way in which the authorities deal with the cotton harvest, or it's the way in which they deal with detainees in prisons and police stations. So we're trying to, I guess, hopefully together create a culture of openness, of an environment where critical voices can be heard, and where civil society is unruly and unpredictable and interesting, and everything is not, happening according to some written script.
Many Uzbeks believe that you are here, international organizations are here merely because the Uzbek government wants to improve its international image, for the eye, as we hear. How much emphasis is given to that in your conversations with the Uzbek government? Do you feel like they're talking to you because they really want to show that they want to project a new kind of Uzbekistan?
I think it really depends. I've said in several situations, I do feel like I've met at least a critical mass of officials, both young and older, who sincerely and genuinely, I think, want to open up the country, and they understand that opening up the country comes with criticism and learning to accept constructive feedback. So I don't think that, at least the majority of officials that I've engaged with, I don't think it's purely about image or raising money or investments. I think obviously not just every Uzbek official, but every Uzbek I've talked to wants to see investment in their country, wants to see Uzbekistan be successful. But I think it's deeper than just a superficial desire to, attract more tourists or more business. I think it does run deeper, and this may be my more idealistic, optimistic view, but I think there was a certain fatigue, a certain exhaustion that came with dealing with the past 27 years of a one-man rule, which was very authoritarian.
We want to see from the Uzbek government a liberalization of everything, how civil society functions, how the media functions. We want an independent media to ensure accountability for officials. We want civil society to be able to operate, to document violations so they can be corrected. We want to see the thousands of political prisoners released that are yet languishing behind bars.
So the release of those more than 30 political prisoners are not enough, or they're not?
Well, they're highly commendable, but there are still too many political prisoners.
I also have to say I've been really interested in the trends. There have been a number of releases that have continued up through the present time, which often seem to be reacting to not just international pressure, but even local organizations and activists. And we've seen releases continue through February and March of 2019. So we're now beyond that initial wave of well-known human rights defenders. There's been releases of other people who the authorities seem to acknowledge were imprisoned for political grounds, whether it's espionage charges or it's extremism charges. And there is an acknowledgement that there are still thousands of people that are in detention on so-called extremism or terrorism charges. And our organizations, to be clear, are not calling for thousands of people to be released in one day. We are calling for the authorities to re-examine the cases of hundreds, potentially thousands of individuals who landed in prison from the late 90s through the mid-2000s, often in group trials where due process rights were not respected or torture was indicated. So those are ongoing conversations. And so far, I think the authorities have been quite receptive and have been open to having those conversations with us.
And we would like to see those released rehabilitated.
Yes, rehabilitation for prisoners is in a way the next phase.